Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to this series of lectures on modern European history. And I am Shankar Kumar. I teach history at the Department of History, Hindu College in University of Delhi. And what we would be talking about with reference to European history is a very fascinating topic, and that is fascism in Europe. And when I say fascism in Europe, please don't have a very restricted sense of the meaning conveyed by this. Basically, other phenomena, contemporary phenomena of Nazism, which prevailed in the interwar period, that is between the two world wars, that also gets included in this. So, today's discussion is more about the theoretical aspect of fascism, not about the detailing of the ways and means by which it emerged and spread and also ended. So, we are not talking about that, but we are talking about the attempts by historians to theorize fascism, to theorize Nazism, and that's why we are using it in a rather inclusive term, fascism in Europe. So, this will not only include fascism of Italy and Nazism of Germany, but also say Bolshevism of Russia, because the conventional attempts have sought to see the three as linked with each other in terms of its attributes. And the category of totalitarian regime generally is applied to understand the features of these phenomena, be it fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, or Bolshevism in Russia. So, let's begin talking about it. And as you can see on your slide, Marxism and fascism emerge as the two revolutionary movements of the 20th century Europe. In fact, there are several movements emerging from Marxism. There are several movements emerging from the phenomena captured through the word fascism, as I just mentioned to you. So, it's a worthwhile topic to look at and to analyze. Also, as you can see, the conventional portrayal, or what you can understand as stereotypical portrayal of fascism, has been done in a way which treats it as synonymous with oppression and domination. And this is done because of the World War that followed emergence of fascism and Nazism in Italy and Germany respectively, leading to Second World War, and also some kind of a dubious record in power under Hitler and Mussolini. So, on account of these, there is some tendency to understand fascism as a regime typified by oppression and domination. We will dissect these stereotypical portrayal to make some more nuanced understanding of the emergence and working and attributes of fascism. So, this particular lecture of half an hour or so is mainly about the stereotypical vision, about the stereotypical understanding of fascism, the way we have studied it in our school textbooks or even beyond. The textbook kind of conventional presentation is what we are talking about in this particular interaction. And what will follow after this, the second part of it, would be the recent perspective, the recent approach that is deployed to make a more nuanced understanding, or in fact that attempts to weave a theory of this, and therefore it tries to pull it out of its usual presentation as a temporary phenomena. So when you build a theory, it's a long term. When you build a theory, it's more generalized, right? So the possibilities and eventuality of such regimes coming again, that also gets simultaneously analyzed in terms of the essential attributes of this. But as I said, that this particular interaction is about the conventional mold in which fascism has generally been presented. So when we track down the attributes of this stereotypical understanding of fascism, quite a few features come to the fore. For example, one very usual understanding of fascism is premised on the fact that it was bereft of any ideas of its own. In fact, I was talking to my students about this, and I began my lecture by getting their viewpoints on this, and one of the students actually began with this, that it didn't quite have an idea of its own, because it is largely understood as some kind of a reaction against the other more progressive movements that were contemporary or in the backdrop of which fascism emerged, that is liberalism and socialism. So 19th century history or early 20th century history is about the rise and growth of liberal polities and liberal ethos. Similarly, socialism also is an ideological and you can say some kind of a political invention of 19th century Europe, and that was put to some kind of a historical test on real historical plane in the form of the USSR, the Bolshevik Revolution, and so forth. So we shall talk about it, that generally our level of familiarity with liberalism and socialism is more intense, and we tend to regard fascism as a mere transient reaction against more progressive movements like liberalism and socialism, and therefore we rob it of an originality of its own. We rob it of the possibilities of durability of fascism, and those are the elements that get dilated and expanded in the recent approach that we would be talking about in the sequel to this lecture. Another attribute of fascism, Nazism and Bolshevism included, of course, and this you should all through keep in mind, because I will be using this word fascism all through the lecture, but obviously in its conveying capacity it will include Nazism and Bolshevism, unless I distinguish it in terms of their specificities. So the other attribute of the conventional portrayal of fascism is that it is fraught with subjectivities and contemporary polemics. This is to say that we have very strong ideas about, and that's how it has come into being. Ever since the emergence of Hitler, Mussolini, or for that matter Lenin and Stalin in the USSR, there is that Cold War kind of bipolar division that has resulted, and all of us have very strong views about the goodness or appropriateness of these phenomena, or we are just having some kind of an abhorrent kind of view about it, or we detest it. We don't want to even talk about it. So that's the kind of reaction and subjectivities that people generally carry about fascism and Nazism and Bolshevism, and therefore most of the presentations by historians about these phenomena are beset with subjectivities that are very individualized in terms of the author. Now, Italian fascism, or say German National Socialism, and several other variants of fascism had its own specificities, right? And that is what we began with, and we are not denying this. Yet, historians and theoreticians have tried to attempt some kind of a general provisional theory of fascism. And as all of us know that this exercise of making a theory or weaving a theory of a phenomena has its own advantages, but it also has its own disadvantages, right? So obviously in theory making, quite a few specificities would be ironed out. But if it can lend itself, if these three phenomena can or are in terms of its attributes amenable or are commensurate of being presented as a theory, then we can do some bit of predictions about it. There is a greater degree of certitude with which we can understand the preconditions of fascism like phenomena to emerge even in the present times, or at timelines different from the actual historical root of this, right? So then in the present lecture we will also see not only the attributes of the conventional portrayal of fascism, but also try to critique it as to what are the negatives of presenting it in a particular way. So that also we will take care of. Now let's understand this. This proposition of Bolshevism and fascism being intrinsically connected, and when I say fascism, think of Nazism as well. So the three being intrinsically connected, as all these three were totalitarian regimes with dictatorship based upon the exclusive claim to leadership by one political party. Now this is the first mold in which the phenomena is presented. So Bolshevism, fascism and Nazism are seen as intrinsically connected as totalitarian regimes, right? And when we say totalitarian regimes, it is essentially about dictatorships that are based on the exclusive claim to leadership by one political party. Obviously, when such a portrayal was being made, the contemporary times were the times of the Cold War, and obviously the Cold War prejudices also and Cold War schemata of seeing things in bipolar ways also influence this. Now, when we start viewing the three as a totalitarian regime, then we also discover that be it fascism and Nazism or Bolshevism, both used the ideal of popular sovereignty to justify their rule or to emerge as the legitimate ruler and so forth, or to legitimize whatever they were doing under these regimes. So in fact we find that the leaders, be it Nazi leaders, fascist leaders or Bolshevik leaders, they did resort to using Enlightenment authors' ideas, particularly the one by Rousseau, who spoke of the general will. And it was the leader representing the general will of the masses that legitimized them to rule. So here the leader is in his own self-conscious way is not a dictator. He is replacing the parliamentary representative systems that existed in Germany immediately after the First World War, but in that replacement, the self-conscious image is not that of a dictator, rather the projection is that the ruler is ruling as the representative of the masses as a consequence of the general will. He is the one who reflects the general will of the masses. Please understand this, and this is critical for our understanding, that there is nothing novel about this claim. It's not as if this is for the first time being done in European history. In fact, if you see the 19th century European history, or if you see even the history of the French Revolution, the iconic French Revolution, you will discover that the iconic leaders of the French Revolution also, for example, Robespierre, he also profusely used, he had tremendous declamatory skills, and his oratory was phenomenal, and he profusely used the principle of general will to legitimize the governance that was being carried out at the behest of, in fact, the executive wing, the Committee of Public Safety during the French Revolutionary period, and which was overtaken by the extreme radicalism of the Jacobins. Of course, that had deviated from the principles with which, liberal principles with which of equality, fraternity and so forth, with which the French Revolution had begun. Yet, all those wartime measures which brought it very close to some kind of a dictatorial regime during the French Revolution, Robespierre is constantly invoking Rousseau's general will to give legitimacy to the rule during the Reign of Terror, right? Ultimately, of course, the entire battery of French revolutionary leadership gets guillotined during the process of the Reign of Terror, but that's what he's doing. Similarly, in the 19th century also, you have several instances where you find these deviations from representative politics or parliamentary form of governments trying to invoke Rousseau's general will to get legitimacy or to appear as ruling on behalf of the people, right? So there is nothing new here, but what also is true for fascism, Nazism and Bolshevism is that all these phenomena rejected, all these movements rejected parliamentary government and representative institutions for a democracy of the masses. So it gets variously projected as totalitarian democracy and so forth, right? So there is some kind of a justification by invoking Enlightenment scholars as big as Rousseau to justify their rule. Similarly, we also find that be it Bolshevism, be it fascism or Nazism, they all operated with the mediation of a new secular religion. Now, this might appear as oxymoron, but I'll just explain to you as to what we mean by it. So, they operated with the mediation of a new secular religion between people and the leaders. So, that gap between the people and the leadership, the top leadership, was not mediated by representative institutions as usually is the case in case of liberal parliamentary governments or democratic governments. But in this case, in fascism, it was mediated that gap between the ruled and the ruler was mediated by a new secular religion. And this new secular religion simultaneously provided to the leaders an instrument of social control over the masses. So, what do we mean by this secular religion? Now, this is precisely what underpins the ideology of fascism, Nazism, or Bolshevism. So, the entire effort was made to get the consent of people, however fragile it might have proven to be subsequently in history, but you just cannot deny that towards the beginning, towards the early phase of the emergence of these phenomena, be it Nazism, fascism, or Bolshevism, there was a popular support. It had successfully mounted on the aspirations of people by invoking imageries, by invoking cultic imageries, by invoking some real historical rooted ethos in their own areas, in their own countries, and that provided fair degree of a sense of originality to the people who were under its spell. Of course, we will see that the mechanism of terror and propaganda were critical to it, but we should not be misled into believing that it was only the handiwork of terror and propaganda. So, this consent was established not only on account of deployment of terror techniques or propaganda. To begin with, people were charmed by this kind of invocation of a future which is somewhat different from what they had seen so far. And what they had seen so far, we will see very soon in the next part of this lecture. Now, in both cases, be it Bolshevism or fascism, this consent of people, this popular consent of people was expressed at the public level through official ceremonies that examples of which are very many, festivals and imageries, and on a private level through single political party control over all aspects of life. And when I say all aspects of life, please understand that by the end of the 19th century in Europe, be it the radical left or the radical right, both were very apt in demanding 360-degree control over people. So, it wasn't as if in the liberal regimes it was the political, communal aspect of people's life and individuals' life that was demanded in terms of participation. In this case, in fascism, it was the totality of human participation that was called for, right? So, when we see the problems of subsuming the two under a totalitarian approach, of course, as we discussed towards the beginning, that it disguises the difference between the two and also various forms of fascism. So, these specificities somewhat get ironed out. It generalizes Stalinism as totalitarianism, not Lenin's Bolshevism. So, that difference between Stalinism and Lenin's Bolshevism also gets somewhat diluted here, which is what we should be mindful of. Then it also treats totalitarianism as a static concept, while the fact of the matter is that be it Bolshevism or fascism or Nazism, they displayed fair degree of dynamism and change over their course. So, you will find in Russia, public ceremonies were briefly discontinued and then again resumed after the Second World War. It also, this clubbing together of the two under totalitarianism also fails to acknowledge the difference between fascism as a political movement and fascism as a government in power. it places undue emphasis on monolithic leadership cult, and that is something that's a negative. Totalitarianism theory presents leaders also as manipulating the masses through propaganda and terror, and thereby robbing the masses of free volition. We shall come back to this in the next part of our lecture, and we will see that there are better ways to frame them and make a better sense out of this phenomena. Thank you.